I needed to replace these two things on my Mk3 Mondeo, which together make the seal or boot for the brake pedal push rod, which is the mechanical linkage that goes through the firewall in front of the brake pedal. Now I'm going to split this job up into several different videos because they can each cover a separate topic that different people might be interested in. So in this one I'll show you how to remove and reinstall the brake and accelerator pedal assembly from the car. In my case I'm doing that because I need to in order to install these, but obviously you might have other reasons. So here's the brake and accelerator. This car's an automatic, so if you have a clutch, sorry, but it'll be a little bit different. I can't show you, of course. I believe that you need to bleed the clutch system as part of the process as well. Anyway, you can see up here, there is this hole where you can see daylight. That's where the push rod goes through the firewall, and again, it's where my replacement boot needs to live. But you need to know about it regardless, because you need to disconnect that push rod at the cabin side before you can remove the pedal assembly. Here's the view from the other side. That push rod connects here to the brake linkage in the engine bay. Now you don't need to touch any of that. Okay, so first thing you'll do is remove this plastic hex nut, which is on the end of the push rod. I think it's plastic because it's designed to fail in an accident. But anyway, I suggest that you don't try to use an open-ended spanner on this, as when I tried there were alarming plastic creaking noises, so I stopped before I broke anything. So you want a socket, and it needs to be a deep socket. 12mm is the size. And this is the most awkward nature of this job, by the way. All of the nuts that we'll be working on are quite awkward to access, so you'll need a good range of extensions and ratchets. And I also needed a universal socket on a few occasions. Alright, once that's off, put it somewhere safe, and the pedal arm will now be free to come backward off the rod when we have all the other bits free. So next you need to disconnect the throttle cable from the accelerator pedal, which is pretty simple. It has a rubber grommet which you need to pull back out of the pedal body, and then the cable just comes out the slot and can be left alone. Then you need to disconnect the brake pedal position switch. Start with its connector as shown, and then you need to unclip the cable from its tie up above. You just pry that out with a blade or a screwdriver. This is going to be one of the separate videos, as the brake position switch is something that people might want to know about on its own. You really do need to take off the switch, even though it looks like you could just leave it on, because it does need to be reset when the assembly is reinstalled. So please go watch that video concurrently with this one. Then the last thing to do is undo all of the mounting nuts, of which there are 6. There are 4 surrounding the brake pedal push rod, and I believe that on left-hand drive cars all 4 nuts are cabin side. But on my right-hand drive car there are 2 here on the inside, and the other 2 nuts are in the engine bay. Anyway, you will again need a deep socket, as the bolts extend out quite a way with excess thread. This time the size though is 13mm. And as I mentioned before, extensions, I'm using quite a long extension here so that I can use a bar way back out in the cabin just to make life easy. And once it's loose you can then get the ratchet on them, and that makes it easier. Then there are another 2 bolts, also cabin side, way up on the top of the whole assembly. You'll basically be looking straight up from the floor to find these. You can see them here with the coated white threads. They're quite hard to access, so I suggest nothing larger than a 3/8 ratchet handle. And as I said, on right-hand drive cars, there are these 2 nuts on the engine bay side. They're hard to see. The lower one is below the brake linkage bar, and the other is hidden behind that aircon pipe, such that there's no way that I was capturing it on camera, sorry. Anyway, it's not too hard to get a socket on these nuts. Again, use a suitably sized extension, and the top one you can just feel it on by hand, despite not being able to see it. The other nuts on my car were regular hex nuts with flared mating surfaces, but these have inbuilt rotating but captive washers. so don't mix them up with the other ones. Right, now that you've removed all the fittings and the whole assembly will be free to come out. Here's mine. One more thing to discuss, which I just couldn't show you because of the restricted space, and that is this arm, which is designed to transfer force from the brake pedal into a collapsing bar inside the dashboard in the event of a frontal collision. Now, I couldn't remove the assembly without first removing this pin which you see here and collapsing the arm away. So there's this clip which just pulls off, and then the pin comes out, and you'll have to reassemble that on reinstallation. But there's no way it was coming out without doing that. And I'm sorry that I couldn't show you doing it properly in the car, but there's just such limited space in there I couldn't set the camera up. Anyway, so now the footwell is free of the pedal assembly. Here's my brake pedal push rod and its replacement boots going on. Again, this will be in a separate video. Anyway, you can now do whatever job you needed to do, and once you've done that, then you can get on with reinstallation. So you place the assembly back on the bolts, again paying attention to the accident linkage. You can see here how it just sits captive but not in contact with this bracket, which is on a steel tube running along the dashboard. Once it's in that correct position, you need to resecure it on its support arms using that pin and its clip. Then it's just a simple case of getting all the bolts back on, nuts, sorry. Nothing very sophisticated about that. Maybe get all of them on finger tight first to check that everything's in the correct place, and then use or a ratchet rather to tighten them up, but then finish off with a torque wrench. The specified torque is 25 Newton meters. And remember, this is to do with your brake pedal, so you do want to make sure that the fastenings are done correctly. Then reattach the throttle cable to the accelerator pedal. Just slide the cable through the slot and push the rubber grommet in. Next, put the plastic hex nut back on the brake push rod. Now, I should have said before, by the way, make sure that you have the rod through its receptacle here before you go doing up all of the nuts. That needs to be slid through at the same time that you reposition the whole assembly. There doesn't seem to be a torque spec for this plastic nut, but obviously it's just intended to make contact with the pedal so as to link the decoupler arm up. So I suggest that you just do it up until you get contact and then stop. It doesn't need to be tight. Next, the brake pedal position switch needs to go back on. Again, that is in the separate video. Get it on, calibrate it, and connect it back up. And then its cable clip higher up should be put back in place on the assembly bracket. And then you're done. Test everything, that's to say the brake and the accelerator pedals, before driving anywhere. But you should be good. Hope that was helpful.